Continuing our exploration of Wittgenstein's ideas on representation and possibility, we now turn our attention to how the very field of semantics itself has evolved. We're looking at a significant shift in how we understand meaning, moving away from a purely truth-focused view towards something much more dynamic and communicative. So, where do we even begin when trying to define meaning? David Lewis gave us a great starting point back in 1970. He basically said, hold on, before we get bogged down in what meaning is, let's ask what it actually does. Think about it. If we're building a theory of meaning, that theory needs to explain why we have meanings in the first place. What job does linguistic meaning do for us? For decades, the dominant answer to Lewis's question was crystal clear: meaning determines truth conditions. But things are changing. There's a growing chorus arguing that meaning does many things, and its core function is best understood not just in terms of truth, but in terms of its role in conversation, communication, and interaction. This isn't just a minor tweak, it's a fundamental rethinking of what semantics is all about. For a long time, the go-to answer to Lewis's question was pretty straightforward. The meaning of a sentence is whatever determines whether it's true or false in a given situation. Think of it like this: you say it's raining. The meaning of that sentence is tied to whether it's actually raining right now. Versions of this idea, which we can broadly call truth-conditional semantics, TCS, really took off with the work of Davidson and Montague. Now within TCS there were plenty of debates. Some folks thought meanings were functions mapping possible worlds to truth values. Others argued for more complex indices involving time, location, or centered worlds. Still others proposed structured complexes or sets of situations. But here's the crucial thing. Everyone in this game agreed on the goal. Everyone believed the primary explanatory task of semantics was to predict the truth conditions of sentences. Even Davidson, who famously rejected the idea of sentence meaning as an entity, would translate Lewis's question into his own terms. Meaning explains how parts contribute to the truth conditions of the whole. The debate wasn't about the goal, but about the tools used to achieve it. But then, cracks started appearing in the foundation. People began noticing phenomena that just didn't fit neatly into the truth conditional box, or required adding extra layers of complexity. This led to what we might call the communicative turn. It's broader than just the rise of dynamic semantics, though that's a major part of it. The core idea driving this shift is that the meaning of a sentence isn't just about truth, but about its role in conversation. What sparked this? 5 key types of linguistic data kept popping up, challenging the old paradigm. First, non-declarative clauses like questions and commands. Second, pervasive context sensitivity. Third, the tricky business of presupposition. Fourth, conventional implicature. And fifth, expressive meaning. These weren't just minor quirks. They seemed to demand a different way of thinking about what meaning fundamentally does. Let's start with the obvious ones. Questions and commands. Look at did Freed discover any important dance steps? Or give my dog a bath? Does it make sense to ask if these are true or false? Probably not. It feels like asking the wrong question entirely. If you can't assign a truth value, then the meaning can't be just a truth condition. So, what is it? Well, intuitively, we know these clauses have different jobs in conversation. Questions are for asking. Imperatives are for telling someone to do something. This led directly to linking the meaning of these clauses to the speech acts they perform. Thinkers like Searle, Alston, Barker, and Harris suggested that the semantic value of a clause is essentially the type of speech act it's used for. Suddenly, meaning wasn't just about truth, but about action and intention in communication. How do we model this idea of conversation and updating? Robert Stalnaker gave us a powerful framework. Imagine a conversation isn't just a random string of sentences, but happens against a shared background. This background is the common ground, basically. What everyone involved already assumes is true. Stalnaker formalized this as the context set, the set of possible worlds consistent with all those shared assumptions. Now, when someone makes an assertion, like it's raining, what happens? According to Stalnaker, the meaning of it's raining provides the propositional content that gets added to the common ground. This shrinks the context set, eliminating the worlds where it's not raining. So the meaning of a declarative sentence becomes the raw material for this update process. It's the fuel for moving the conversation forward by adding information. David Lewis took this idea and ran with it using a brilliant analogy. Think of the conversational context like a baseball scoreboard. A scoreboard tracks various aspects of the game: state, runs, outs, balls, strikes. Similarly, the conversational context keeps track of different things happening in the conversation. When you assert something, you're adding a run to the common ground score. When you ask a question, you're adding it to the questions under discussion QUD dimension. When you command someone, you add an item to the to-do list dimension. This scoreboard metaphor beautifully illustrates that the conversational context isn't just one simple thing, it's multidimensional. And if the context is multidimensional, it suggests that sentences themselves must have multiple dimensions of meaning, each designed to update a specific part of the scoreboard. So, how do we capture this mathematically? One influential approach, dynamic semantics, models the semantic value of a clause as its context change potential CCP. Think of CCP as a function. It takes the current state of the conversation context and spits out a new state after the utterance. For example, the CCCP of an interrogative sentence like "Who ate the pancakes?" would be a function that takes any context and returns a new context identical to the original, except it now includes "Who ate the pancakes?" as a new question under discussion. Other approaches, dynamic pragmatics, take a slightly different route. They might say the semantic value itself is still something truth conditional like, but it fits into a specific slot in the dynamic context, and pragmatic mechanisms handle the actual update. Regardless of the exact mechanism, the unifying idea is that the meaning of any clause, whether declarative, interrogative, or imperative, lies in its ability to reliably move the conversation forward in predictable ways. This dynamic perspective also opened the door for integrating ideas from expressivism. Originally developed in philosophy of language, especially around ethical non-cognitivism, expressivism argues that certain words like ought or good don't describe facts about the world. Instead, using them performs a speech act like expressing a desire or making a recommendation, and expresses a non-cognitive mental state like a preference or a commitment. By combining this with dynamic models, researchers propose that conversational contexts aren't just informational. They also have a practical dimension representing commitments or normative stances. Just as descriptive statements update the informational scoreboard, normative statements update this practical dimension. This framework has been incredibly fruitful, leading to dynamic treatments of epistemic modals like might, indicative conditionals, and deontic modals like must. Another push towards multidimensional meaning comes from work on expressives. Pauline Potts identified a class of expressions like please, damn it, or words with negative connotations whose expressive force doesn't play by the usual rules of composition. You can't just plug them into a truth-conditional structure and expect everything to work out nicely. This strongly suggests their meaning isn't purely truth-conditional. Potts argued that any adequate theory must account for these expressive meanings, likely by situating them within a theory of conversation. This reinforces the idea that meaning isn't monolithic. Many sentences, it seems, are doing multiple jobs at once. Take "It was Fido that ate the pancakes." We usually say this asserts that Fido did it, but it also presupposes that someone ate the pancakes. Or consider Shaq, who is huge and agile, played for the Lakers. This asserts the Lakers fact, but conventionally implicates something about Shaq's physique. We need to distinguish between what's being asserted at issue and what's being presupposed or implicated not at issue. This distinction between at issue and not at issue content is crucial. Not at issue stuff like presuppositions and conventional implicatures behaves weirdly compared to the main assertion it projects. Even if you negate the trigger, like saying it wasn't Fido who ate the pancakes, you still presuppose someone ate the pancakes. Same with conditionals. If it was Fido who ate the pancakes, then he should be punished still carries that presupposition. Explaining why this projection happens is a major challenge for semantic theory. Furthermore, There's a difference in how we treat these contents conversationally. You can easily challenge the assertion, was it really Fido? But rejecting the presupposition often requires more effort and disrupts the conversation flow. No, nobody ate the pancakes. Dynamic frameworks provide a natural way to model these differences, treating assertion, presupposition signaling, and conventional implicature as distinct ways of updating the conversational scoreboard. Now, let's talk about context sensitivity. This is arguably the most pervasive challenge to traditional truth conditional semantics. Think about the sentence, I am here now. Is it true? Well, it depends entirely on who I refers to where here is and when now is. The sentence itself doesn't contain enough information. This immediately forces us to shift focus from abstract sentences to utterances in a specific context, or to index sentences that explicitly track contextual parameters. David Kaplan's logic of demonstratives was a landmark attempt to handle this formally, assigning semantic values relative to coordinates representing context features. But Kaplan's system hits a wall with many other expressions. Consider this or that. What determines their reference? It seems highly dependent on salience and speaker intention, not just predictable aspects of the context. Same goes for incomplete phrases like every beer or the table. Their scope seems arbitrary, not fixed by some predetermined rule. This suggests that the neat, algorithmic mapping between sentence form and truth conditions breaks down for a huge chunk of natural language. So, what do we do about this messiness? One radical response, echoing Grice and Schiffer, is to ditch the idea that sentence meaning is fundamentally about truth conditions. Instead, maybe meaning is about constraints. Constraints on what propositions can be expressed, what intentions are possible, or what speech acts can be performed. Another path taken by variable-free semanticists like Pauline Jacobson is to treat the meaning of context-sensitive parts like he in he left as a property, e.g., the property of being a male who left. The listener then applies this property to the salient individual in the context. This again pushes the explanatory burden onto the listener and the conversational context. A third major development, arising from puzzles about anaphora across close boundaries, like a dog has been rummaging. It has torn open, led to discourse representation theory, DRT, or file change semantics, HIME. Here, indefinite noun phrases introduce new discourse reference, think of them as temporary placeholders or indices, into the conversational context. Pronouns and other definites later refer back to these placeholders. This shows that meaning can involve manipulating the ongoing conversational context, not just encoding static truth conditions. Okay, we've seen the evidence for the communicative turn. But why did truth conditional semantics dominate for so long? And why were these communication-centric phenomena initially sidelined? Harris offers a compelling historical explanation. He argues that the early pioneers of modern natural language semantics, Davidson and Montague, inherited a methodological toolkit. This toolkit wasn't originally forged for natural language. It was crafted by earlier giants Frege, Tarski, Carnap, and others working on formal languages, logic, and the foundations of mathematics. For them, understanding language was a tool for achieving other goals in philosophy and math. This subservience meant they adopted a specific idealization. They focused intensely on finding a precise, one-to-one mapping between sentences and truth conditions, often ignoring or setting aside aspects of meaning that didn't fit this mold, especially anything related to communication, context, or speaker intention. So, here's the punchline. Davidson and Montague, when they turned their attention to natural language, picked up this existing toolkit. They brought with it the ingrained idealization, favoring truth conditions above all else. But here's the problem. Natural language is messy. It's full of context sensitivity, presuppositions, implicatures, and non-declaratives that don't neatly map to truth conditions. Applying this overly idealized toolkit to the rich, complex reality of natural language inevitably led to overlooking or misinterpreting many phenomena. The communicative turn, then, can be seen as a reaction against this inherited idealization. It's a forced march back to basics, recognizing that to understand natural language meaning, we need to look beyond just truth conditions and embrace its role in communication. And importantly, this toolkit also carried over Free's core insight about semantic composition as functional application, which remains central to much contemporary work, even as the overall theoretical landscape shifts. In essence, the story of modern semantics is one of inheritance and rebellion. The initial dominance of truth-conditional approaches stemmed from adopting a powerful but ill-suited methodological toolkit forged for formal languages. The current communicative turn represents a necessary rebellion, driven by the undeniable evidence that natural language meaning is far richer and more interactive than a simple truth condition can capture. It's a return to viewing meaning through the lens of communication and conversation.